welcome to SUNY Oneonta's In Discussion. I'm Gianna Vasilakos. With me on today's program is Professor Joe Pignato of SUNY Oneonta's Music Department. Also joining us live via Skype from Dublin, Ireland is Ivan Robertson. Professor Pignato and Mr. Robertson recently collaborated on a one-of-a-kind performance in SUNY Oneonta's Fine Arts Building. Here's a look.
Lord, the fat man rose to his feet. The rest of the circle joined in. Give me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Good evening, folks.
Thank you very much for joining us today. That seemed pretty amazing. So can you just please elaborate on the performance and just tell me what it was about?
Sure. Well, it was about, I had been thinking about technology and how technology allows us to connect. Cell phone, social media, email. You know, we can connect across great distances and we can connect with more people than ever before. And at the same time, the technology is imperfect. Right. So we try to connect, we email people, we call people, and those connections, you know, the cell phone connection fails, the email doesn't go through, and we end up feeling a little less connected than we might think we would. So I thought it would be neat to create a piece that used social media and Skype and other types of technology to connect a bunch of people across the globe. Right.
So why did you decide to call up Ivan?
Well, at the same time I was thinking about that stuff, I visited with Ivan. It was the first time we had seen each other in, maybe 20 years. And I was really delighted to see him. And we had talked for years. Years earlier, we talked about collaborating together. And I thought, you know, there's got to be something we can do. But hey, he's in Ireland and I'm in New York. Well, Skype seemed to be a great way to come up with, you know, a performance platform where we could collaborate together.
Right. So particularly, would you say that you're tech savvy yourself?
I would say I'm a technology enthusiast and a music technology enthusiast. I'm not a technologist. I don't have training in it. But as an electronic musician and composer of electronic music, I do use a lot of technology.
All right. So how about you, Ivan? Would you say you're tech savvy yourself?
Oh, God, no. No, not at all. I'm fairly helpless with all that stuff. And Joe, I mean, you know, Joe was a drummer, so he mostly hits things with sticks. He tells you he's very savvy. Keep that in mind. But no, for me, it wasn't really, my approach wasn't, I wasn't really thinking about the technical aspects of it at all. I mean, that was sort of Joe's thing, and we have a friend here who is very good at stuff like that, too. But, you know, for me, the story was more a personal connectedness and disconnectedness. So we were kind of coming at it from two different angles, I guess, two different. You know, it worked, I think.
That's really cool. So how did you feel when Mr. Pignato called you up with this idea?
Well, I mean, you know, we have a long history of Joe and ideas. You know, interested and not quite sure what Yeah, that's a good question. Not quite sure what kind of monster he was creating, and I don't know if I still exactly know what kind of monster he created, but definitely something I wanted to be in.
Yeah, Ivan writes these stories, and I had read a number of them, and what struck me is that they really capture a kind of sense of impermanence that I think is a fundamental reality of human existence, and a lot of his pieces are very situated, so you feel immediately like you're in the time and place that he's writing about, and yet the themes really cross across time and place. And so I thought his stories in general could be a very good analogy, and the fact actually that he wasn't thinking about technology made it more interesting. If he had written a piece about technology or technological mishaps, it would have been really corny, and I think it would have been too obvious. But because he wrote something that represented, sort of what he does in his work, it was more authentic. And for me as a composer, but also for me as Ivan's friend from high school, former roommate, there was the sense that, wow, if I can do something with this piece that not only sort of supports the narrative as he's envisioned it, but also brings together other people that I've had those kinds of relationships with, collaborative, artistic relationships with, it might be really interesting and at the same time, in a sense, reflective of the themes in his stories of people connecting and, in a sense, losing connection, And so I think the risk of using all these technologies was kind of always at the core of our collaboration. So even though he wasn't thinking about technology and I wasn't writing hoping the technology would fail, it was an interesting sort of presence for us as we worked on this, like what actually is going to happen.
So, I mean, out of all of Ivan's pieces, why The Lost Indian? Why did that stand out opposed to any other thing?
Ivan really selected the piece. There were a number of pieces, but that was one that he had sent me and said, I'm thinking this might be a good piece, so he could really tell you about that.
Okay, yeah, well, that, I tend to write short stories, kind of, American short stories, but they tend to sort of be in one or two spots, and this was a more episodic kind of thing. It had a long shelf life, and it went through a lot of different stages. For a while I was thinking it was going to be a film. For a while it was a novel, but it was never working. I could never find a good form for it. I couldn't lose the story, but I didn't know what to do with it. So because it was episodic, it fit in as well. I finally found a way through Joe's structure. I mean, the way I was coming at it, Joe's structure was a metaphor for me, and I think what I was writing sort of worked as a metaphor for him. But mostly because it was it was sort of cinematic and it was episodic. So, there was a girl, and so.
That's really interesting. Do you particularly have any emotional attachments to this piece?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, I probably have emotional attachments to all the ones that work. But yeah, no, I mean, I don't know if you're asking if it's autobiographical. Sure, they all are, but yeah, no, it definitely, yeah. Yes.
That's great. So now when you read The Lost Indian, did you immediately think, yes, this is it, this is going to be great to my vision?
When I first read it, I did have that reaction to it, and before I responded to Ivan, I actually put it away for a while. It came in at a time where I was extremely preoccupied with some other major sort of life issues that I was dealing with. And so I said, I need to read this when I have more of a clear space in my head. And when I did, I almost fell off my chair because A, it was so compelling, and B, it was, although a short story, it was actually more than I could possibly work with for this particular piece. And I thought, there has to be a way to take this piece and capture, Ivan used the word episodic, capture the different episodes, but I didn't really know what the way would be. And so it was just a gut feeling that maybe we could fragment the text. So Ivan and I started talking about the idea of text fragments. Initially, I was thinking about text fragments that were less linear and more sort of a holistic presentation of the piece. But he sent me 16 text fragments that he edited and recorded with his friend that he's talking about, Tommy Weir. And when I heard the 16 text fragments in order, I was really, really excited because he can talk to you about the process, how he did this, but I was struck by the fact that the narrative was still totally present. The same thing that hit me when I first read the piece, or things that hit me, were all there. And yet a lot of the other transitional stuff and stuff you do to develop a story was taken out. And it just, was an indicator to me how powerful the narrative was. And so I really started to think very differently about how to compose for this type of story. And it's interesting, too, that Ivan mentioned a kind of cinematic quality to the story. Instead of composing music to support recitation or narrative, which was my original thought, I began thinking like a film composer, and I thought about creating sound cues. So there's one really powerful fragment where the protagonist is in, or perhaps the antagonist, one of the main characters is in an office with a kind of authority figure, and that authority figure is sort of telling him, you need to stay on the sort of straight, narrow path, and at the same time saying, but I don't really think you can.
Right.
And in the conversation, there's this kind of mounting pressure, and it starts almost with a kind of optimism, and it ends with a real sort of, I don't want to say pessimism, but an unsettled sense of what's going to happen next. And that particular fragment struck me, and I thought, boy, if you were in that room, the sense of mounting pressure, what would it be? And so I started actually with that fragment first, and instead of composing music, I created these beds of music that would come out of the scene in a certain way. So for that scene, if you will, there's this kind of almost industrial pounding, it sounds like a metal drill sound. It's acoustic drums recorded and processed, but I thought, I need to now listen to each of these fragments, and I had a high-quality audio of Ivan reading them, and I have to put myself in the scene some way and think what would be the sound in the scene, or what might be the music if somebody composed a soundtrack. So each of the music beds represents either an ambient sound that might be in the room, or something that the main characters might be hearing in their head, or something that a film composer would create if this were indeed a screenplay or a short teleplay or something like that.
That's really interesting. So did you use any other software or programs to accomplish this?
Yes, I worked with a number of live recording software packages for tracking, actually recording the samples I used. One's called Pro Tools, which is kind of an industry standard for audio recording, and then another called Audacity, which is actually a sort of simple 2-track stereo digital recording software for sampling, or at least that's how I used it, for sampling. And then I took those recordings and samples and I put them into another program called Live by a company called Ableton. And Ableton allows you to do real-time or production manipulation of sound. So you can process it and manipulate it. And that's really where I spent most of my compositional time. I would sort of conceive of something that might go with the text fragment, and I would try to create a core sample and then process it to make it sound like what I thought might work with the actual narration.
That's really cool. So after establishing your idea, how did you get other musicians to participate in this?
I had, along with Ivan, I think I had a kind of hit list of people that I really wanted to collaborate with, either again because I had many times in the past and now they're distributed, they're far away, or there were some people that I had never collaborated with, and including, there's even one person that I'd never collaborated with, but she is a friend of a friend, and she heard about it and said, I would love to be a part of this. And so I thought, okay, well, if all these people are going to be involved in this, I have to think of a way that's sensible and not just musically sensible. It has to work with the narrative. If we're all playing music, we're going to crush this really beautiful and powerful narrative. At the same time, there were technological concerns. If everybody's playing together, we might lose Skype connections. The audio could be problematic, as it turned out to be at certain points in our performance. So I came up with a structure really inspired by the fragmentation of the text, which was, if we have these music beds and there is a cinematic quality, and it's almost, when you listen to just the music beds in the text without the solos, it's as if it's almost like a memory collage. If somebody were to have memory of these experiences in sequence, I could imagine it being like what we initially created. And so I contacted all of the soloists and I said, do you want to be part of this? And they all agreed, and agreed enthusiastically, which was encouraging. So that meant that I could ask them to do more than I originally told them they were going to do. And I asked them, would you be willing to create actually a piece of it rather than me writing for you? I want you to create something original inspired by Ivan's text and the music beds I've created. And so I gave them 3 things in advance of the performance: a master of all the music beds with the text in sequence, and I gave them the music bed that preceded when they would enter and the music bed that would follow when they entered. And those were the only things I gave them, and actually the only parameters. They could choose whatever instrument they wanted to play, and each person came up with something really magnificent. I think really the only other limitation I gave them was time, that they shouldn't solo for more than roughly 2.5 minutes.
Right. So how many soloists were you able to get together?
There were 10 total. And they were operating in multiple sites in New York, in New Jersey, in Minneapolis, in Texas, and then also in Canada, in Brandon, Manitoba, in Aachen, Germany, in Jerusalem, Israel, and in Auckland, New Zealand. And we had Mexico City up until a couple of weeks before the performance, but there was a scheduling conflict.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So creating a piece like this, what kind of complications were you guys possible to face?
Wow, I think there were a lot. The first complication was in the production, making sure, using social media, that the actual... I could tell somebody, listen to these music beds, listen to the text, here's the text in print, but I couldn't always be sure that what came through on their end was A, understood, and B, made sense to them. So there was a lot of back and forth. A simple example would be I uploaded all the music beds to something called SoundCloud, which is a collaborative social media audio production and or audio presentation platform. And for the first week of the soloists thinking about what they were going to do, they were all looking at the listing of the tracks in SoundCloud, and those numbers didn't correspond with the all over numbers. So they're like, wait, am I track 3 or am I all over 3? Because they were different. So all over 3 is the title of a music bed, but it's not the track. And so that was some confusion, and there was a lot of back and forth. And I think there were problems trying to rehearse and get everybody together. And then, of course, our biggest concern was the evening of the performance. Would we be able to maintain a Skype connection with Ivan for the full hour or so? And would the Skype connections with the soloists, would they work on time when we needed them to be soloists? Right.
So, Ivan, with the various soloists that you have and the various time differences, how did practice actually work out?
The performance itself?
No, like practicing prior to the performance.
Well, I mean, to be honest, Joe pretty much carried the bucket on all this stuff. I wrote the story, and I practiced reading it a couple of times. We did something where I sat in this room here, and he sat in. It was a bunch of middle-aged men sitting in their basements putting this together, basically. Joe was in his basement, which it's another story, and I was in here, and we put a couple of things together that way. But as far as all this, as far as the soloists and all that stuff, that was Joe. I was, I wrote it, and then I took a vacation, basically, until Joe called.
Actually, the rehearsal we did with him in his room and me in my basement was actually really pivotal, because at that point I had not told all the soloists all the details, and I still wasn't sure, maybe in the middle of the performance, we would call them, and if the connection worked, then they would perform. If it didn't, we would move on. But because we were able to coordinate the introductory fragment and then the secondary fragment and even the third fragment, we did all in sequence. And the timing, I composed the music so that I could control the timing based on how he was narrating, so he wouldn't have to narrate strictly to some kind of time code. That I felt that would
Very
take something
logical.
away, from the narration. So his narration was really natural, and he could flow, and I could trigger music in response to it. And that ended up making me think, well, if we could do that, I could keep the music beds going until a connection is made with the next soloist.
Wow. So were either of you nervous that the audience wasn't going to grasp your concept?
You want to feel that one?
Always. I mean, that's sort of a given. But no, I don't. Can you guys hear me? By the way, it's slowing down a little bit over here. But to answer your question, if you can hear me, was I nervous about it? I was nervous, but I was in a room 3,000 miles away, so I had, I knew nobody was going to throw anything at me if it didn't work. Joe was, in front of I don't know, how many people were there?
Roughly, I'd say about 80 people, maybe 100 people. We had seating for 65, and then it was standing room only, and we stopped counting after that.
That's great.
Yeah, I can imagine you were more nervous than I was then.
I was actually really, really nervous when I arrived at the space to set up.
Mm-hmm.
I had no worries before that, and when I arrived, and there was a big empty room, and there was actually in the room a percussion ensemble rehearsal going on, and there was a scheduling confusion, and there was all these percussion instruments on the stage, and I thought, I've gotten myself into a logistical nightmare, and I have to direct all these logistics. But a couple things happened. First of all, the staff here at the college is amazing, and so David Giese and Jared and Mark English and other folks who were helping out. Julian Nottingham, who's in the Music Industry Club, was doing audio. They all just showed up, and they just started going about their business, setting up the projectors. The percussion ensemble scheduling conflict was no problem. And I saw it sort of coming together, and then I was really relaxed. And then around 10 of 3, I said, well, let's close the doors because we don't want people showing up while we're setting up. And a couple things happened at that moment. The first was we had been Skyping back and forth all day, and everything was going really, really smoothly. And then we connected with one of the performers in Canada, and he happens to be one of the most tech-savvy of the performers, but that also means he has one of the more technologically complex setups. Right. And we couldn't get it to work. We could see him, but he couldn't hear. We could see him, and he could hear us, but we couldn't hear him. And at the same time, we're connecting with New Zealand, probably one of the other more tech-savvy sites. And he also had a technologically complex setup. And 10 minutes of 3, and we're supposed to start at 3:30. Canada and New Zealand are not producing any sound, and so then I was nervous. And then at 3:20, all of a sudden, New Zealand came through, Canada came through. The audio was beautiful. We could still see Ivan and Tommy in Ireland. We could hear them talking in the background. And I said, I think this is going to work. And then it was smooth sailing.
That's great. So ultimately, what would you did your audience take away what you would like to see?
I don't know what they took away. The feedback was really positive, and I think there was one audience member who commented on sort of feeling as if he had experienced a new kind of theatrical experience, and what he was talking about was not that we had created something so revolutionary, but we made a decision in setup. When we connected with Ivan, we were doing a lot of text back and forth and then Skyping, and we were making connections with the other sites, and so there were 2 10-foot by 9-foot monitors and then a big 8-foot by 10-foot monitor over the stage. And so that's almost like 90 square feet of video of projected images, and Jared and who was doing the camera work, and Julian doing the sound, and Mark English and his crew. They were looking up at these projection screens with such wonder in their eyes. And I don't remember who said to me, but somebody involved in the projection just came and said, "Are you going to show all these connections during the performance?" And I said, "Absolutely not. We've got remote controls.
Right.
The screen will be black, and then suddenly a soloist will appear." And they were like, "Oh, that's too bad, because this is really cool." And then I thought, you know, given what the piece is about, maybe all of the communication should be going on simultaneously. So this person who said to me that there was a new kind of theatrical experience, what he then expounded, he said, "You brought the technological aspect of it front and center without it being gimmicky." And I would love to take credit for that, but really it just kind of worked that way. And so, you know, I think based on some of the feedback, I really hope to think of All Over Now not as a piece, but as the name for this ensemble that will involve these players as soloists, this author and actor as a reciter, and then other artists, video artists, and other people around the globe who are interested in, you know, collaborative, multimedia, interdisciplinary performance.
Well, awesome. I really hope we get to see a follow-up piece to this song. It's great. Well, thank you so much for both coming out today. I really appreciate it, and Skyping in. Thank you for joining me for this edition of SUNY Oneonta's In Discussion. Please join us for future programs and check us out on YouTube at www.youtube.com/SUNY Oneonta. I'm Gianna Vasilakos. Thanks for watching.